Welcome to Discovering the Northwood from the Manitowish Waters Historical Society. We will take you on a journey through our local history with the help of primary source documentation. To learn more about this rich history or about the Historical Society, check out our website at mwhistory.org for blog posts, show notes, our YouTube channel, and a full transcription of this episode. As with many historical works from this era, there are phrases, terms, and descriptions that are inappropriate to our modern sensibilities. The Manitowish Waters Historical Society in no way condones these offensive remarks or passages. We would like to introduce the amazing journal transcribed exactly from the written work of Robert Loveless, who resided on Alder Lake and was one of the founding pioneers of the Manitowish Waters community. Robert Loveless has a comprehensive journal of his hunting, trapping, guiding, and caretaking from the earliest days of Manitowish Waters. His colorful stories, rich details, and geographic references allow this journal to come to life, providing important context to the life at the turn of the 20th century in Manitowish Waters. The following journal is read by me, Brenna Reilley. The Wild Adventures and History of Robert Loveless, March 14th, 1925. My father died when I was going on 12 years of age, and we was a poor family, and my father was a great hunter with a muzzle-loading gun and was a good trapper. After his death, my mother told me that if I could make a living hunting and trapping and fishing, I could go on and try. So I started to a lake 4 miles from the place where we lived in a little town called Turtle Lake, Barron County. I fished through the ice for some time, and good luck, and done very well trapping for some fur animals, but did not get much for their pelts. But as I grew older and came more and more familiar with the business, it was easy for me to get any kind of fur animal. Beaver, otter, mink, rats, marten fisher, foxes, timber wolves, or any kind of hunting. This became easy. Finally, in my travels, I came to Vilas County, where it was wilder in the year of 1891, and at this time this country was very wild. And here I fished for the market and sold them to the logging camps for provisions, and also kept trapping and hunting. And I also took up guiding, as this job was easy for me, as I understood the business, and made a good guide. And once I went out with a man, I always got him again, as I worked and tried to get all the big fish on his hook that I could. Whether he got them in the boat or not, I wanted him to feel them on the line or see them. Finally, I was hired by the year by the president of the Congress Hotel Company of Chicago by the name of Richard Southgate, and also a man by the name of Mr. Marvin Hewitt, which is now the vice president of the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. This man I was with for many years, especially Mr. Southgate. I was in his employment for 30 years until they all died, but I still kept hunting and trapping. In the year of 1891, when I first arrived to Vilas County, I came with a young fellow by the name of Alec McGregory. He took a great liking to me and wanted to go with me and hunt, trap, and fish. And of course, I never had much money, nor he didn't either, but he had more than I did, as he was a brakeman on the railroad and was more sure of his money than I was at trapping. When payday came for him, he got what he had coming. And when an otter or a wildcat or a beaver got in my trap, I was not sure of him until I came and shot him, as they often get out of their trap or gnaw off their foot. Or when I get a fish on my line, I was not sure of him until I got him safe in the boat or birch bark canoe. The same with a deer. I might wound him and he give me a hard chase and then get away from me. Well, I and this fellow Alec McGregory, we left Chippewa County in the night on a freight train for Rylander in the year of 1891, late in the fall, and he had in money $80, and I did not have any money. All I had was a tent, size 7x9 wedge tent at that, and some traps and tin dishes. When we got to the town by the name of Prentice Junction, he began to drink, as I knew he was a drinker and would spend all he had when he got started. So I said to Alec, lend me $5. And he said, all right, gave it to me. And I kept this up at times until I had more money than he had. I knew that we were going in a strange country and we had to have some money to start. When we got to Rhinelander, we went to the hotel and got a bed, and he had a bottle to take up to bed with him, and I asked him, what do you want that for at night? He said, I might want to drink in the night. Well, the next morning, he said he'd give me enough money to pay for my night's lodging, and I said, all right. As for myself, I never practiced getting drunk as I was drunk twice and was very sick after it, and do not forget this. Well, the next morning at Rhinelander, we took the Northwestern morning train, going north to a town called Woodruff, a distance of 25 miles. This town at the time had about 5 houses, including a store, saloon, hotel, and little depot. This was the size of it, and from here, I and Alec walked over to the old road, 12 miles to the lake called Big Trout Lake, and the whole country was solid pine forest. Lots of places the sun never got to the ground. The timber was so thick. Well, when we got to Big Trout, there was a fellow by the name of John Mann, had a summer resort there. And on an island, there was a man by the name of Jock Blaisdell. And on another island, a man by the name of Pat Russell. He had a saloon and sold liquor to the Indians and the lumberjacks for a living on the other island. And on another island, there was a fellow that lived by the name of Billy MacArthur, and he lived with a Native American woman and is today one of the oldest men in this country. And as I find, he is a good fellow. This was all the residents that there were on Big Trout Lake at the time. I and Alex started to hike back the 12 miles to the town of Woodruff, and when we got there, the town being so small and could not get the stuff we wanted, we were told that there were another little town a little bigger about 2 miles west by the name of Minocqua. So we hiked over to this town. This looked so much better, so I remember I've done all the buying for the outfit and spent Alex's money. But he was around, but said not much of anything. He knew that I ought to know what we ought to have. So I remember that I got $16 worth of grub. I got an old cook stove that I gave $5 for, and about 4 lengths of stone pipe and an elbow, and I hired a man with a pair of light bobsleds to haul the outfit to Big Trout Lake. I gave him $3 for the trip. Well, we got there, and the teamster said, where do you want me to leave your outfit? And I said, drive along and we'll see. I did not know where to hang up, but this time he was driving along the side of Big Trout Lake in the thick woods, and I saw a kind of deep hole down in the thick, tall pines. And I said, you can drive down in towards that hole cluster. And he said, this is pretty hard to get in there. Well, I said, this is all right. We'll throw her off right here and we'll carry her down. So back he went, as much to say, them crazy fellows soon will get frozen out of that hole. And of course that night had to be a cold one. I guess somewhat 10 or 15 below. I know this little tent that we had, size 7 by 9 wedge, no walls, was small for the cook stove and our bed. So we threw all the snow away and pitched the tent and threw snow up on the sides of the tent to bank it and keep the heat in. So having the stove in there, it melted the snow on the sides of the tent and was wet, so when we went to bed with our clothes on, my hair was somewhat pretty long, and I covered up my head, and I had a coat or something else for a pillow, and my hair got down between the tent and this pillow, and in the morning I found that my hair was frozen fast to the tent. You see, the fire went out and the tent was wet. When I turned in bed and when I was trying to get my hair loose, I could hear it breaking off and feel some of it pulling out. Well, I said to Alec, this is too cold for this tent and we have no room. We had better look around today and see maybe we can find some log shack to get in. So after we had some salt pork fried and coffee, we started up along the lake shore towards John Mann's summer resort. I spied a little shack in a bay of the lake, and we went up and looked it over. It looked pretty good, only the boards that it was made out of were split poles, and there were cracks everywhere, and the floor was poles. So I went up to John Mann and asked him if we could move in the shack, and he said he did not own it, but it belonged to a guide by the name of Old Paul. He said, I guess it's all right to go in there. He won't use it this winter. So we moved in the shack, and the shack was small, in size about an 8 by 9. And when we had the fire going, it was pretty good. But when the fire went down, the heat went out through the cracks. And when you were inside and it was dark outside, you could not see the cracks. And when you were outside and looked at the walls, it was nothing but cracks. And at times you could see the moon shining through. Well, this was too much for us, so we had to plan something else. So we talked with John Mann, and it seems that he wanted us around there for the neighbors as he had none. So he said, why don't you go in that tamarack swamp over there, cut some logs, and I will let you have my team and haul them out, roll them up, and make a new shack. The team will cost nothing, and it is a good thing that it didn't cost me anything, for when I went from the tent to the first shack one night, Alec was laying on the bunk and said, well, I wonder how much money we have. So he dug in his pockets and I dug in mine, and what he had and what I had was 36 cents. Now this wouldn't even pay for harnessing the horses. Well, we cut the logs and rolled them up in the log cabin. We had nothing for a roof, so we put poles over the top. Down the lake, about a half mile, the Indians had been camping and had a wigwam, and there they had hid in the woods some material made out of bushes that grow along the lake shore. So we got that and spread it over the poles and threw a lot of dirt on top. The dirt was piled high in the middle, and it got some muck out of the swamp and plastered the cracks. Now this shack was all right. There were no windows and one light in the door. So we finally got settled and I got to fishing. Now, Alec was a bum fisherman, but a good fella. So when we got to running around over the lake looking for some good places to catch fish, at times he wanted to go over to this island where this man, Pat Brazel, had a saloon. Of course, he wanted a drink one day. He said to me, let's go over to the island and ask some of the fellows where to fish. And I said we better not go. But anyhow, we went, you see. We were strangers in that country, and when we went in the saloon, there were 3 guides drinking at the bar, and we walked in and said, hello, fellas. I never was in a place before, so I stood a few minutes and nobody said anything. So I went over next to the wall and sat on the floor on our hunters, and the 3 guides kept drinking and talking. So after a little while, Alex spoke up and said, say, fellas, where can we go and catch some fish? And one fella spoke up by the name of Charlie Carrigan and said, find the places like we did, and he shoot us when we came here. So this ended asking, and it seemed to me that we were not wanted in that joint. So we got out and went outside, and I said to Alec, I told you not to ask them where to go fish. But what I did know was that if there were fish in this lake, I, in time, would know all the spots. And I must say, in time, I certainly did find the spots where they said. Well, time went on, and I and Alec were getting along nicely, so one morning I was up. He was laying in the bunk and had not gotten up yet. So I do not just remember, but I do know that we started an argument about something or another, and of course I get mad and jumped and grabbed him by the shirt collar and jerked him out of the bunk. I tore off all the buttons of his shirt. Well, this he could not get over, but I was sorry, as I ought have not done it. But he left me, and before he went, he told Pat Brazel that I would give him the cook stove, and one day Pat said to me, Alec, give me that cook stove, and I said to him quick, you leave that stove alone, or you will get in trouble. So this was the last I ever heard about it. So I went to the southern part of the state and got my brother to come and stay with me. His name was Robert Loveless. He was somewhat younger than I was, but we got along fine, and he liked the business and turned out to be a great guide and a good hunter and trapper. He had at one time all tamed $1,000 worth of fur. One winter, him and I caught through the ice 800 pounds of trout and sold most of them to logging camps. That is, traded them for something to eat. And one morning, I was up and Lon was in bed. A fella came to the door and tapped. I opened the door, and here was the fella Charlie Carrigan, the man that said find the fish ground, like we did, who shoot us. And I said, hello there, as I did not know his name then. He said hello. Then he began to say something like, "Did you tell Pat Brazel that I told you, told him that I said," and so on. I have forgotten the stuff that he managed to get out of me, only he said, "Come over to the island and we'll prove it." So I put on my coats and mittens, and away we went. You see, he just wanted to get me over there and made up this stuff. Well, when I got over there was nothing said about what I went over to prove. All they said was, "Why don't you and your brother come over and have a good time and play cards and drink with the rest of the guides and not stay over in that shack all alone? Why don't you get acquainted with the other guides? If you don't in the spring, we'll all buck you." Charlie said, "Won't we, Moses? Won't we, Paul?" And they said, "You bet, of course." I said nothing. They said, "You won't get a day's work. We'll starve you out." Charlie said, and the other two men said, "You bet." Then I did speak up. I said, "You fellas can't starve me out, not as long as I have a fish pole and a gun. Boys, I fished for a living before I came here." And they said, "We'll show you." So I left them and I went my way and they went theirs. And must to say, a year later, this man, Charlie Kerrigan, came walking through from Boulder Town, and the shacks were few and scattering a long ways apart. So Charlie came to my cabin, he tapped, and I said, "Come in." I gave him a chair, he sat down, and I knew pretty well where he came from. I knew the distance that he had walked, and he had his snowshoes with him, and he looked somewhat tired. I knew what he wanted was something to eat. I would not ask him. I wanted him to ask me. After a while, he said, "Bob, have you got something to eat in this shack? This is what I wanted." And I said, "Quick." "You bet, Charlie. I'm not starved out yet." And I went to work and gave him the best that I had, so he ate and went on. So another time, a year around two, later he came my way again and came in, and I done the same way. Let him wait until he asks for something to eat. And I said, "You bet, Charlie. I ain't starved out yet, and it looks as if I ain't going to be neither." So he did fill up, and I gave him the best of what I had in the shack. So it ran along some years before he came again and finally tapped at my shack door in the winter when I was out on the bank of Little Trot Lake. Well, I was glad to see him. He was all alone and he had a pack on his back. Well, he came in, threw down a sack. I must say his face was a sight, all scratched up and scabbed up, and he was on his way to the Flambeau Lumber Company to try and get a job. Now he asked me for something to eat again, and I said, "You bet, Charlie, I ain't starved out yet. I have more grub now than I ever have before." Now you know he followed, drinking and playing cards and fighting, which he wanted me to do, and I did not listen to him. He was a good guide, and all the money that he would earn in the summer, he would drink it up in the fall. And when he came this last time and wanted something to eat, he just came off a drunk and had gotten a fight and got skimmed and scabbed up well. That poor fella got off up in northeast Boulder Junction, away back in them hills by Beaver Lake, I guess, and was making moonshine. And finally, he came up missing, and no one knew where he went. Some think he was killed by another moonshiner. Thank you for listening to Part 1 of the Robert Loveless Journal by the Manitowish Waters Historical Society. Stay tuned for Part 2 to hear more about the hunting, fishing, and guiding journeys of Robert Loveless.